I want to focus on WrestleMania particularly because that was entertainment, right? You had to know going in, you and Johnny Knoxville weren't going to have a quote-unquote 5-star classic match. You had something entirely unto itself. It was a spectacle. In my opinion, Vic and I stood there in the arena, in the stadium, and watched it go down. And I cannot compliment you enough. I believe I actually texted you after the fact because it was like, wow, you superseded expectations. You got to give yourself a little credit for that. But how did that come to be? What made that so special?
Oh man, I don't even know where to begin. But I'd like to. There's one little statement you made that I'd like to expand upon a little bit here.
Please.
But I don't want to get into because it can become a real rant here. I don't want to go into the anatomy of a match and all this kind of thing. But while it was a spectacle and while it was dressed with all kinds of, special effects and if you want to call it that, right? And stuff that you don't normally get to do with a normal WWE superstar in a normal wrestling match, I still think it was actually a great wrestling match. Because if you look at the things that actually the components of a wrestling match, they're all there.
Sure.
Like we didn't throw anything out of the framework of a wrestling match to create this match. One of the things that we run into because we work here and we're surrounded by this all the time, and especially you, Corey, because you worked in the ring for so many years, sometimes it's hard to take off the insider goggles and just put on fan goggles.
Yes.
Right? Like you're looking at structure, you're looking at the things that you know are the components. So one of the things I'm really proud of is that match blinded so many people internally to all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Like people who know the business inside out, who've been working forever, forgot about match structure, forgot about match psychology, when you should do this, where you should do that. And they were just reacting in real time to all of it. But if you actually look back on it, structurally speaking, it's a normal wrestling match.
Checks all the boxes. I'm going to have to watch it back because Vic and I stood there in AT&T Stadium. We were in our little corral area for the announcers that weren't working at the time. And there were only a few moments all weekend that I got to do that. And Vic and I were standing there, and in particular, and I say this without any exaggeration, may have been the loudest AT&T Stadium was all weekend long, with the exception of when Stone Cold's glass broke.
Yeah.
That's how the magnitude of that moment. And Vic and I are looking at each other, laughing and smiling and going, God, this is so much fun.
Yeah.
And it was different, and it stood out. And in the wake of WrestleMania, a lot of people still talking about that matchup because it was just so different.
I think people talk about that for years and years and years. So another thing that I'm really proud of that match is one of the things you touched on earlier when you brought it up. We created something that doesn't actually, it doesn't really exist. There's not really a match like that anywhere else because there's only one Johnny Knoxville and one Sami Zayn and one WrestleMania where those things could exist. Going back to what we were talking about with Cody and Seth, circumstance. There is an element of circumstance to this because you can't recreate that match. You just can't recreate that match. Like, for example, you could watch Undertaker Shawn, and you could be two guys on the independents, and you can do your little version of that match.
Mm-hmm.
You can't redo a version of this match because it doesn't exist.
Right.
There's no other party boy. There's no other wee man.
Right.
There's no other giant hand. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Was there ever a moment all WrestleMania weekend or in the lead up to this where because we're about the same age and you grew up and Jackass was a cultural phenomenon here at least in the United States where everyone and their brother was obsessed with it. Did you ever have any moments in this process where you went, man, Party Boy is shaking his parts at me at WrestleMania?
Well, son, I said this in a couple of interviews, but I didn't grow up a Jackass fan.
Oh, okay.
So, but I obviously knew what a huge deal it was and all that. So there were definitely moments in the lead up, like, man, I never thought 20 years ago when I started wrestling that I'd be wrestling Johnny Knoxville at WrestleMania.
Right,
of course you have those thoughts, right? But I had to do a little bit of homework for the match too, because I had a preconceived notion of what Jackass was from 20 years ago to when I first made the decision I'm not into this. 20 years ago, when it was like, hey, there's this thing called Jackass, and all I understood about Jackass is it's a bunch of guys getting hurt. And I don't really like watching guys get hurt or people like hurting themselves. Kevin is different. He loves those videos of like people slipping and falling or whatever. He loves that stuff. I'm kind of squeamish. I'm like, oh, don't show me that. So I didn't really know what Jackass was about. And I kind of made the decision early on, like, it's not for me. But then, now revisiting it and all, I've said this before, but I find it ironic that I missed the point of what Jackass was all about. Because the reason Jackass was a huge cultural phenomenon is because of it was the camaraderie, and it was the guys doing everything. Yes. It's the crew, and you get me and I get you. And like, it's the laughs, and it's so funny and ironic that I would miss the point because I love wrestling. Yes. And people constantly miss the point about wrestling. So it's just so funny that I would have missed the point. And I'm quick to call myself out on that. And I'll admit I was wrong. So all this to say, going back and watching Jackass a little bit going into the match, it was kind of like I wanted it to be a true pro wrestling Jackass collaboration crossover. And I think that's what it was. If you go back and watch it, and like maybe a little elements of Home Alone as well, but that's a different thing. But that's kind of what I wanted. I wanted it to be true to what happens when wrestling meets Jackass. And I think we nailed it.
Mission accomplished.
Yeah.
Killed it. As Corey said, we stood there with like our childish glow on our faces. We were looking around at everyone rising, and there was a moment in the match that I think I said, oh, they're about to go nuts. And I think he kicked out of something, and the place like erupted in laughter. And the match was great itself, but I want to go back to you actually diving into this story to the point where you did the stuff on social media, because I think that also is now getting lost after the match. Like, this was that beautiful story, told, but through the power of Instagram and Twitter and things like that.
Well, so that's another thing that that I take a lot of pride in now, looking back on all of it and talking about circumstance. The build-up to that match is also not a build-up you could have done with anyone else. I can't build my Hell in a Cell match with Seth Rollins, for example, by flying his phone number over Los Angeles. Right. Like, that's not how you do. That's just not how you build programs.
That's not what that was.
We got to go so far.
Thing. Right.
Exactly. We got to go so far out of the box. And I got kind of addicted to it. I was like, oh man, here's all these things we can do next. And there's just so much awesome stuff that we could do that I think is like him giving out my phone number and me taking all those calls. And I think that's going to be very, very memorable. And it was very exciting. And there was so much other stuff that was on the table to do that for one reason or another we didn't get to do. But it just and one of the big things was the red carpet premiere at the Chinese Theater in Hollywood, going to the movie premiere. And that was such an awesome moment for me. I've never done anything like that before, but it was my Andy Kaufman moment a little bit, with Dave Letterman. And the thing that I find funny is, in this case, I was Andy Kaufman and the wrestler.
Yeah.
I was both, you know what I mean?
Which married the two,
which is funny. But it just got me so addicted, or not, almost going back to what you asked me about when was the light bulb moment of, transitioning from good match guy to storytelling guy or whatever it is. This was a bit of a light bulb moment for like, oh man, there's just so many creative ways I want to do things. And I hope I can do them. It's kind of hard sometimes here with the nature of how we do things, but it just got me so excited about the out of the box ways to build a story or tell a story, and things to do, and ways to build your character, all this fun stuff. And I couldn't have done it with anyone else except Johnny Knoxville, because he's not a conventional wrestler. Mm-hmm. B, he's not even a conventional celebrity.
That's true.
Like if I was wrestling Leonardo DiCaprio, we wouldn't be doing this stuff. It's because that's what Johnny Knoxville does. He does gags and goofs, and he gets you this way and that way, whatever. So it could only have worked with him. So that was another thing that a big takeaway for me is the creative way we can go about telling stories and getting character stuff over and doing things that we don't always do.
Like what you hear? Catch full episodes of After the Bell on Spotify. Follow us now and never miss an episode.